Yo, how we doing? In today's video, we're gonna be looking at our Healing Hands Void Knight build. Now, this build, you're gonna be generating anywhere between like 35 to 45k ward once you're at endgame and get proper gear. Right now, during boss fights, I am about like 35-ish, but I'm definitely far from the optimal gear and attack speed. So I would really hope to see that push between 40 and 45k. So if you guys do get better gear than I have showing off in this build video, you guys are going to be sitting very pretty. You can tank pretty much anything in the game. Tier 4 Julra, I've been able to tank right up until like the last second. Once there's the void pool underneath you, the fountains shooting at you, you do start to take quite a bit of damage. So you might need to swap time zones. And I was needing to, with absolutely terrible resistances. Right now, because of my boots and just very unlucky suffix rolls, I'm at negative 27% physical damage, and still the only thing that could really like kill me was like tier 4 Julra. I know she's not doing like physical damage, but even then I'm still at 23% lightning and 43% fire resistance. So there's a lot of areas where my defenses are super weak. I'm not even crit strike avoidance capped either. I'm only at 69% from my blessing. Like, my suffixes have been terrible on my gear, and even then, the only way I'm dying is if I deliberately try to sit in some of the highest damage you can receive in the game. Otherwise, for monoliths, I'm sitting at about 350 corruption at the moment. I just started pushing today, so I've been able to push up to about there. Have had zero issues surviving anything there, any sort of like monolith boss. I've been able to just sit there and do whatever I want, which has been really nice. And then also just mobbing has been very quick as well. I thought this was going to be a little bit on the slower side, but just on the safer side. But with the lunge and the cooldown that we have and the AoE from our healing hand swipe, you can kill pretty much a whole pack of enemies immediately. You lunge into them, you swipe, and they basically disappear in 1 to 2 hits, depending on your modifiers and things. But it has been very smooth. This has been very forgiving too. Like I said, with the resistances, they're terrible, absolutely terrible. And even then, I'm still just flying through things. So if you guys do want to be using this at endgame, you can start with pretty minimal gear and work your way up as we go through the build. I'm going to give you guys some alternate options too, just because I have been able to get quite a few upgrades today. I did hit rank 8 on the Merchant's Guild today, so I was finally able to get like LP'd unique armor on this setup and just start making it feel way better. And I got pretty good luck with our Temporal Sanctum runs for the LP. So there was a lot that did help me out, but you do not need all of that stuff. You can still do like 200 plus corruption and do it very easily with suboptimal gear. So as we go through, I'll make sure to point all that stuff out. But the main gist of this build is basically what we're going to be trying to do is scale our healing effectiveness really high, because that's going to turn into base damage for our healing hands, and let us generate more ward, because within healing hands, there's a node that if we have any of the effects to where your current health is lost per second and that missing health is gained as ward per second, if that's anywhere on your gear, all of healing hands healing is going to turn into ward for us. So that's why we can get so high, and we can just ignore health in terms of like suffixes and stuff and just focus on your resistances. But as long as you have that on your gear, you're going to be able to get a ton of ward. And then from there, we're going to go into cast speed. Now, initially, I thought this was going to be melee attack speed because we're turning healing hands into a melee, but it scales off of melee and everything except for the attack speed. So you guys will be scaling cast speed. I believe this is a bug right now. If this does get changed later, this build will actually be even better. This bug is hurting us. All you're going to need to do is swap your gear with cast speed over to attack speed. And I'll get into some other options once we look at the gear. But right now, that's really what we're looking at in terms of like the main point of the build. And then the reason I picked Void Knight instead of Paladin is just because the benefits of Void Knight are significantly better. One, we get the echoes, which we can scale their damage really high. And the echoes, when they do their thing, they're actually going to give you the indirect cast of healing hands, which will give you even more wards. So since we're using healing hands directly, we get the full healing from it. Then we get 35% of the healing when it indirect casts, and so we essentially get double damage from Healing Hands. We get the indirect cast for 35% more healing, and then when our Echo goes, we get another 35% healing because it is casting Healing Hands for us. So it ends up working out really well. And then also, since we are in Void Knight, we get a lot more crit multi because we're investing more into that tree. And then also we're able to grab the skill Anomaly instead of Holy Aura. And I'm going to explain why we want that specifically. So here within Anomaly, we can get 150% increased crit chance, which is going to free up a ton of space on your gear to add more damage or any other affixes you guys are really looking for. It's going to help out a ton in that regard. It is always going to be up. Anomalies has 100% uptime here. Also, it's going to give us attack and cast speed. So no matter when you guys are playing this build, depending on what Healing Hands is scaling off of, you're going to be good there. It's a free 20%. And then also we're going to be getting 30% cooldown recovery speed. Cooldown is very important with this build because it's going to play into our volatile reversal and our lunges, which are two things that are going to help out our damage. I will get to both of those in a little bit once we talk about those skills specifically. And then really the only thing we're missing out of Holy Aura would be the like healing effectiveness, but we're already at like 1100 right now in my particular setup. You can probably get into the 1400% healing effectiveness. And then otherwise the crit chance is just less than what Anomaly is, and it has less like double chance. And then there is a little bit of crit multi in Holy Aura, but it's not that much. The biggest thing about not taking Holy Aura would be within Healing Hands, we get Cleric's Wrath, which gives us damage per level of specialized buff skills. So since Holy Aura is not being taken, we do lose 20% here, but we still get to the 40% from Healing Hands and Sigils. So that is the smallest trade-off, but I think it's incredibly worth it for the benefits that we get out of Anomaly. Otherwise, for the actual passives tree, the Paladin stuff, all we're missing out on is a little bit of healing effectiveness and damage out of Reverence, and then a little bit of movement speed and damage out of Light of Reye. So, and that's 24 points for those two. There's really nothing else at the end of the Paladin tree that is going to help you out. While in Void Knight's tree, we get a couple very key things. I know it's technically not a Void Knight exclusive because it's on the left side of the tree, but we do get the melee kill threshold at 10%. And you're only going to be meleeing. So this is active on every single enemy you're going to be fighting. And it's incredibly helpful. You don't need to like waste points if you were doing like a Paladin setup to get there. Otherwise, you can get the increased damage. For every 3 seconds, you get some leech. Obviously, those things are pretty early on, but in the later half is where we get our echo chance and eventually melee attack speed if they do ever fix it. Even if they don't, this is still worth it to take for the echo chance. Otherwise, we get some mana and some increased melee damage and armor on melee kills. So there's a lot of other things in Void Knight that really do help us out that I do like more than Paladin. But with all of that out of the way, I just wanted to take that time to show you guys some gameplay while I was talking about all that. But let's go ahead and take a peek at the actual skills and our gear. Taking a look at the skills, starting off with Healing Hands. Obviously, this is our main thing. The first thing you're going to want to prioritize is getting Cleric's Hammer. This is what's going to allow us to cast Healing Hands twice when we hit an enemy. So that's going to give us more healing and obviously just straight up doubling our damage. From there, you're going to want to be going down into the Seraph Blade, which lets it turn into a melee. Now, I do only have 1 point into Virtue of Patience here. I have messed around with 2 points. Even with a ton of cast speed, you still really do feel that minus 32% with the second point. So I do like to just leave this at the 1 point and call it a day there. And from there, we can actually put some points into Turn Undead and Halted Scourge. These only focus on these once you get extra points into Healing Hands. That's going to be basically your tier 6 and tier 7 versions of Healing Hands. On your helmet is where you're going to put those 2 points. Everything else is going to be the like base Healing Hands points and the extra 2 you get from a non-exalted piece, but we can grab the Bane of Evil. So this is one big reason we are scaling healing effectiveness so high into the 1000+% range, because that's going to turn into flat damage for us, and it's also going to give us more ward and more healing. So how we actually get that ward is if we go over here to Divine Barrier, we pick that up, and that's where you want that one piece of gear where your missing health is turned into ward. Once you have that, you're going to be able to generate all the healing from Healing Hands into ward. And that's where we can go into Prayer of the Fallen and Urgent Healing here for the upfront healing. That's going to allow us to get crazy amounts of ward, especially once we start to scale our attack speed. Otherwise, I do grab the area and mana cost here. I like this to just be free, and I think that really does help out considering our sigils are pretty expensive. That's really the only thing that's going to be using mana in the setup is your sigils, but in monoliths, as you're killing, they're going to be casting for free anyways. So as long as you're not spamming the sigils, you should be good on mana. But that's currently our setup here with Healing Hands. Anomaly, I kind of briefly mentioned this, but the main thing you want to be doing over here is in the right. This is all the like self buffs. So you're going to want to put the bubble on yourself, the time bubble. And then otherwise, grab immediacy. This is going to prevent enemies from disappearing when you cast it. You want them to stay there so you can actually kill them. So make sure you grab that just so you're not sending them forward in time for a little bit. Otherwise, max out our duration. The effects persist for 2 seconds after exit. Makes it a lot more forgiving. You're going to want it to be casting on you so you can just run around with it and always have that. The mana cost doesn't matter. The big one, increased crit chance, attack speed, and the cooldown. For sigils, all we're going to be doing is focusing on getting the insta-cast and the last wish here for the chance to summon sigil on kill. This is going to really help out your mana. Basically, at the start of Monolith, cast like 1 or 2 sigils of hope, then start running in, get the kills, and you'll, as long as you're moving quick, you're going to stay at 4 stacks of sigils. If you do get really unlucky, just cast 1 here and there. That's why it's really important to have the insta-cast too during boss fights. You can maintain all of your swings. You can never just let go of Healing Hands. You just hold it down, go, and make sure you're at max sigils of hope. Otherwise, we can get the healing effectiveness per sigil and also the duration and the extra sigil, so we can have 4 of them. Moving on over to Volatile Reversal. This is what's going to allow us to deal a ton of damage to bosses, and it's something you are going to have to get used to just because obviously you can teleport around with it. But what we're going to want to be making sure we do is grab the Void Rift on arrival and start, because each one of those is going to go into our Harbinger of Dust right here, which makes enemies take more damage when they're hit by Void Rift. This is going to stack, so this is why we want our cooldown to be so low on Volatile Reversal, because right now, once you get it low enough, you can actually stack this 4 times. So if you just cast Volatile Reversal twice, you're going to get 2 rifts and then 2 rifts again, stacking that up to 4 times, which is why we grab the cooldown recovery speeds here, the big nodes, and then otherwise focus into the global cast and attack speeds, and you can focus into a little bit of movement. A lot of the times when I do use this, though, it's when I'm standing still. So you could swap these out for the area here just to make sure you're hitting the enemies as you're using Volatile Reversal. It's kind of up to you what you do with those 2 points. And then for Lunge, what we're going to be focusing on is just making sure we can use it as much as possible. So to do that, we're getting the extra charge and the cooldowns here into Warrior's Renewal. Max that out. And then what we're going to do from there is turning it into fire. So this node right here is going to actually give us fire penetration per enemy you slide through. So if we go ahead and take a look at that, right here, we can slide through and we're going to get some stacks. In big groups of enemies, you're going to get this stacking up to like 5+. I've seen like 10 before, depending on the enemies that are around. So this can be super nice for getting a ton of extra damage, because essentially what you're doing with this build is you're just dashing in and immediately hitting your Healing Hands. So if you guys have that penetration, you're going to be killing whatever you hit much quicker, and just something to focus on with Lunge. Try to aim for the back enemies so you do get that stacking up with the Crusader's Fury. Super quickly going over the passive points, you're going to want 30 in your Sentinel. I just do the Juggernaut here for the different resistances, and then you can grab Vitality. This really doesn't matter. You could do the melee stun chance. Either of those are good. If you don't have stun chance on your gear, that's probably actually where you're going to want to be putting those points. Then you can grab Armor Clad and Valiant Charge here. Then you're going to want to be dual wielding, and then finally maxing out Blade Master for that increased attack and cast speed. So that's going to be helping you out as long as you have that sword equipped, which you will with our unique that we're going to be using in the build. For Paladin, you're going to be wanting to grab the damage and penetration, and then maxing out your healing effectiveness nodes here. You only need a couple points into Holy Icon to get to Prayer. Don't worry about maxing out Holy Icon right away. You're really only going to get this up to 4 at level 100. Just focus on getting prayer up because that's going to give us more healing granted and also the damage granted. So from there, looking at Void Knight, I just do the physical void resistance and health, some leech, attack damage every 3 seconds, the multipliers, the melee kill thresholds, melee damage and armor, mana, just because I do like a little bit more mana regen, just to make sure I can use sigils a little bit more freely. Then echo chances here across the top. Don't worry about the reduced attack speed or the mana cost. You're really not going to notice those. It's much more worth to get to the 10% echo chance. But yeah, that is currently our passive setup. I think this works out pretty darn well. Now for the all-important gear. So we are going to be using a few uniques with this setup. A key pair is going to be the Shattered Chains and Siphon of Anguish. These two combined let you get Doom, which lets you deal more melee damage. And then also with Shattered Chains, you deal more melee damage per stack of Doom on the target. It's going to be very easy. Also gives us flat melee, also the armor, and then for here, if you guys get LP on the belt, you're going to want cooldown recovery speed. Once again, cooldown is very important for this build. And then on the ring, focus on getting healing effectiveness, and then if you do happen to get like a 2 LP, you can do any sort of like defensive stat, or if you want to do like fire damage, you can do that too. Completely up to how like the rest of your build is playing out. For the boots, I like the Celeron Step just for the melee crit multiplier. You can get up to 105%. And here is where you're going to actually want the Frenzy after you use a traversal skill and the increased effect of Frenzy on you. So this is going to give you a ton. Really quick, if I go ahead and use my Lunge here, I'm at 87% cast speed. If I use that, we jump up to 117 because this is a tier 7 version of this experimental affix. So that is very nice. And then otherwise, as the second one, if you get like a 2 LP, you can do movement speed or cooldown. Any of those two are going to be really good, but you're going to want that Frenzy one. That's the big one. Like I said, cast speed, attack speed is going to be your best bet, and it's always going to be active. You will never run out of this with your Lunge once you have enough cooldown. So that's what we're using in terms of the armor. Our unique weapon is going to be the Eye of Reen here, which gives us a good amount of melee damage. I actually have a super low roll at 27 out of 45. But then the big part here is going to be the chance to gain a stack of Reen's Ire for 5 seconds on melee crit. So with this build, you're going to want to be hitting crit cap for sure. Once it's just going to be a ton of extra damage. And then 2, it's going to be for our Eye of Reen here. And each stack of that is going to give you melee crit multiplier. So that's why we can stack up our damage really, really high. In a group, you can actually get this to stack much quicker because it's going to count per enemy hit. Without any attack speed bonuses, just on 3 enemies, we can get close to 50. But on a single target, I think I'm sitting, let's see here. Once we get a little bit of attack speed, we can stack up to like the 20s, 30s range, maybe even closer to 40, just on a single target. So that's a ton of extra damage for us right there. And then moving on over to our armor here. So this is where you're going to want, I like the echo damage set. This is going to be really nice. On the helmet, focus on getting healing hands and then different resistances and defensive items. Instead of vitality, I would really like more echo damage, or there's also one for more fire damage. Any of those two are going to be good for your prefixes. Basically the same thing here on our body armor. You're going to want one of the like plus skills that give you melee damage. I think there's like 6 of them. Ideally you want Lunge just because we can get a couple extra points into Lunge and get more cooldown for it. But if you don't get that, don't worry about it. Just get the melee, increased melee damage, and then the increased echo damage as well. And then different resistances or armor, anything like that over there. Our other weapon, since this is scaling off cast speed, we're kind of forced into a dagger. But eventually, if this does change to melee, we can change this to a katana and get even more damage and attack even quicker. So right now, the Sai is going to be your best bet in terms of a dagger, most likely, just because it has the quickest attack speed at 1.18. Here is where you're going to want cast speed and melee crit chance. If you do get flat melee crit chance on your Eye of Reen, which is going to be what you're going for, if you get a 1 LP version of this, increased crit chance is decent, but you're going to want the flat crit. If you do get a good one on there, you could probably make your dagger exalted in terms of cast speed and then keep a normal flat melee crit chance on it at 5%, and you should be good to go there with very minimal crit chance on the rest of your gear, and you'll be attacking much quicker. The cast speed scales up a ton with the exalted versions. Our other ring, there's a bunch of different versions you can use. You can use copper if you need crit chance. You can use opal for the cooldown. If you want to make sure you got a little bit of mana, you can do the sapphire ring. Doesn't matter too much what you pick as the base type, but you're going to want to be focusing on getting exalted healing effectiveness. And then I have crit chance just so I can get close to the crit cap. I'm like 2% short. I think I'm at 98% with my buffs, so that ends up working out okay. For the gloves, what you're going to be making sure you have on here is the percent of current health lost per second, and that turned into ward. This is going to be necessary for the build. One thing I did forget to mention when we were talking about our boots, you can use the Yulia's Path. This is a good defensive option. It gives us healing effectiveness, which is nice damage, but then otherwise a ton of different resistances. Obviously, the Maelstrom doesn't matter to us. And then same thing there, if you focus on the Frenzy, movement speed, cooldown as some LP, that's a decent option if you don't want to sacrifice your defenses as much. But for the gloves, once again, doesn't matter for the base type. You can do the Arcane, you can do crit chance, you can do your armor effectiveness for damage over time. There's a bunch of different options you can do there, but focus on getting the cast speed and crit chance if you need it. Armor shred on there is good, anything like that. And then for our relic, what you're going to be wanting is the Solar Commandment for the fire damage and healing effectiveness. And try to get exalted healing effectiveness. I don't have it. This one's pretty decent. It's got exalted crit multi, but you can get cast speed on there. So I would actually focus on that because cast speed is going to be turning into crit multi for us, but it's also going to be doing more than just crit multi. So that's why I would focus on healing effectiveness and cast speed as your two prefixes on your commandment. And then frailty or any other defensive things will be working pretty darn well there. And then the amulet, you're going to want the brass for the cast speed. Once again, healing effectiveness, crit chance, or fire pen if you're good on the crit chances, and then other defensive options. For our idols, what you're going to want to be doing is stacking the healing effectiveness adorned idols, and then you can either do some shred armor or the fire pen with melee attacks. Any of those are going to be good. Just focus on getting pretty high healing effectiveness is going to be your main focus, and then you can actually add the Throne of Ambition here for the more fire damage per stack of ambition and the armor. So that's going to be really nice, and then you can fill it in with healing effectiveness and resistance Etarian idols. And then to round out the build, we're going to be going over the blessings and my final thoughts on it. So on the Black Sun timeline, I just have crit chance here. The crit multi is really not going to help us out a ton, so I just like the crit chance. I think it's way more valuable. Frees up some prefix slots for us. And then I like to have a little bit of extra mana from ending the storm. Crit avoidance here at the Reign of Dragons. Then Age of Winter, you can do increased armor or physical resistance. I might be swapping this to physical resistance just because mine is so bad right now. So a couple options there. And then Spirits of Fire, you can do either fire damage if you don't have enough additive damage yet. You can do shred fire resistance or flat armor. Anything like that is good there. But there's a ton of different options, but that's currently what I'm running right now. Overall, this build is a ton of fun. I love how interactive it is. It's also super chill just because you are so incredibly tanky. It's not even funny. If you're right-clicking, you are most likely not going to die unless you're at like 1,000+ corruption or T4 Julra without any sort of like really good defenses like I was at. So it is pretty tough to die on this build, and it's a lot of fun to play it. When you load into a monolith, press sigils like twice, and then you can just dash in, go to town, make sure your bubbles up at all times for the crit chance so you can get to your guaranteed crit. And then when there's a tanky enemy, just make sure you are at least like standing still for 2 seconds, and then you can do your volatile reverse, make them take extra damage and give you the cast speed. Now, if you want to be a little bit quicker, one thing you can do is if you have both charges of your lunge, you can dash in, volatile reverse, and then dash in again. And that's a nice quick way of getting your volatile reverse off immediately without having to wait those initial 2 seconds. But it's pretty situational. You don't really need it. You can just dash in and start slamming away. But yeah, overall, this build is incredibly powerful. I'm excited to completely round it out here pretty soon. I'm going to push some corruption. So if there is any sort of big changes, I will make sure to update that in the build planner, and also I'll make an update video. But right now, I think this is going together very, very well. I think this is a fun way of playing. I never would have thought playing Healing Hands on Void Knight when I first saw this skill. So it's pretty cool that it ended up turning out this way. I've been very, very happy with it. So if you guys do enjoy the build, make sure you leave a thumbs up on the video to let me know. Also consider subscribing for more Last Epoch content. We got a ton of builds on the way. But anyways, thank you all for watching this far in the video. Hopefully I'll see you over on our stream. But I hope you all have a fantastic day. I'll see you all in the next video.